Hello, class, and welcome to today's lesson. What we're going to be doing is reviewing over claims, evidence, and reasoning. So, in order to do that, you will be watching a short little video on cognitive bias to kind of help give you that background information and the confidence that you are going to need in order to conduct and write your claims, evidence, and reasoning. So, here is our short little video that we will watch. So, just sit back and relax.
We all like to think we're perfectly logical, reasonable people all of the time, but we're not. Our brains fool us constantly. Most of the time, we don't even realize it's happening. You see, the human brain uses two systems to think. System 1 and System 2. System 1 uses shortcuts to make quick decisions, like whether something rustling in the bushes is a threat. If you hesitate a moment too long, you might be assaulted by a kitten. System 2, on the other hand, is reserved for tasks that require a little extra mental effort, like solving a multi-step math problem. It's the rational part of the brain, capable of complex thought. But we don't use it all that often. The thing is, there's nothing wrong with System 1 thinking. Most of the time, it's super useful. If you're eating dinner at your friend's house one night, it's nice to know that the thing next to your plate works the same way as the slightly different thing that you have at your house that you call a fork. But System 1 thinking can also fool us. It gives rise to cognitive bias. If this looks like a face to you, this looks like an owl, and that looks like a stormtrooper, then you just experience pattern seeking. Our brains are so primed to recognize patterns that sometimes we see patterns even when there are none. The problem with cognitive bias is that it leads us to snap judgments that may be totally wrong. They're the reason why when you're walking down the street and you see a cute Labrador, you're like, oh, puppy! But if you see a pit bull, you're like, oh no, I better cross the street and avoid this terrifying beast. You might be focusing on a single story that you heard about pit bull being dangerous, or focusing on their claws and their teeth instead of their soft furry bellies, or the thousands of other stories about how sweet they are. In reality, the pit bull might be the best snuggle buddy you've ever had, and the Labrador might be a poorly trained nippy jerk face. So as helpful as System 1 thinking can be, it can also trick us. And unfortunately, corporations, advertisers, politicians, and all kinds of other delightful people have figured out how to take advantage of these biases and manipulate us into doing what they want. To defeat bias, we have to be able to force ourselves out of System 1 thinking and into System 2 thinking. That way we can actually do something about cognitive bias. We can make better decisions, fight for causes that we care about, and prove that ridiculous arguments are just that. Totally ridiculous. So, how do you do that? You learn to think like a scientist. Science is not a collection of facts. It's a process designed to defeat biases that can lead to errors or false conclusions. It's based on using evidence and reasoning to build logical arguments. So, when you encounter an argument that smells fishy, you can use the process of science to evaluate that argument and even construct an argument of your own that's a bit more convincing. Let's say your pal Jimmy says to you one day, I've decided the moon is made of Swiss cheese. The moon has craters, and Swiss cheese has craters. Therefore, the moon is made of cheese. Jimmy, buddy, let's take a moment and evaluate that argument. Scientific argument is three things: claim, evidence, and reasoning. Now, Jimmy's claim is that the moon is made of cheese. But Jimmy's only using one piece of evidence to support that claim, and honestly, it's kind of lame. Craters, really. Jimmy's reasoning is also flawed due to a cognitive bias called wishful thinking. Because wouldn't it be awesome if the moon were made of cheese? A moon made of cheese is a moon I'd like to believe in too, Jimmy. Let's see if we can build a better argument. First, let's gather some evidence that could help us figure out what the moon is really made of. Now, building a rocket ship and flying to the moon is an option, but we could just go to the Johnson Space Center in Houston and ask to check out their lunar samples. Turns out the first 6 Apollo missions brought back over 800 pounds of samples from the moon. You could weigh a chunk of moon rock. That's the same size as a piece of Swiss cheese and an Earth rock. See if there's a difference in weight. You take a look at a sliver of the rocks and the cheese under a microscope to compare and contrast the microscopic characteristics of each sample. Finally, you could do a blind taste test. See if your friends can figure out which cracker has rocks on it and which cracker has cheese. Now we can use our evidence to construct a claim. Let's say our experimentation showed that the moon rock was more dense than the Swiss cheese, but about as dense as the Earth rock. And it looks significantly different under the microscope, but pretty similar to the Earth rock. And our 50 test subjects couldn't tell the difference between moon and Earth rocks, but they correctly identified cheese versus rocks in the blind taste test 98% of the time. On second thought, we probably shouldn't have let Jimmy participate in that trial. Anyway, this evidence will help us construct our claim. Our claim is, the moon is not made of cheese. It's probably made of boring old rocks. Keep in mind that a good claim is falsifiable through further evidence collection. So if we did an experiment later on that showed that the moon rocks and Swiss cheese melted at the same temperature, but at a different temperature than Earth rocks, we'd have to rethink our claim and probably do some further testing. Now for the reasoning that connects the evidence to our claim. Keep in mind that reasoning should be based on facts, not feelings. So our argument might look something like this. Our experimentation showed that moon rocks are more dense than Swiss cheese, look different under a microscope, and they taste different than Swiss cheese. However, moon rocks and Earth rocks are about the same density. They look similar under a microscope, and they taste the same. Therefore, the moon is not made of Swiss cheese. It's probably made of boring old rocks. Claim, supporting evidence, and reasoning to connect it into a complete argument. Take that, Jimmy! Well, folks, that's all we've got for you today. Cognitive biases are normal, but it's important to be aware of them. You can use the process of science to help you avoid your own biases and the biases of others, make better decisions, and build better arguments that make you look smart. Thanks for watching, guys.
All right, so that was your video on the trouble with cognitive bias. So now what I would like for you to do is take out the handout that was handed to you on evaluating arguments. So what you all are going to be doing is evaluating these arguments to see which argument is a well-written claim. So your instructions here are: a scientific argument should have a clear claim, supporting evidence, and reasoning that connects the evidence to the claim. It should be based on facts, not feelings. You just watched the video on System 1 and System 2 thinking. Remember, in System 1, we're kind of basing things on like our feelings. And System 2 thinking is kind of looking at facts. So what your job to do is read both of the arguments. So you'll read the background information. Once we get to argument A and argument B, you're going to draw a box around the sentence that you believe is the claim. A claim is a statement or conclusion that answers the original question. You will underline the evidence, which is the observations or data that support the claim. And then you'll do squigglies under the reasoning. And remember, reasoning is the justification for why evidence supports the claim. It contains logical and relevant science ideas. So once we finish with this, then you would answer questions 1 and 2. And so let's go ahead and go through the argument. So this is a real science experiment. It says here, insulin for diabetic people. Insulin is a small signaling protein that helps to keep blood sugar levels steady. The insulin gene contains the instructions for making insulin protein. In people with type 1 diabetes, the specialized cells in the body that make insulin are damaged. They cannot make insulin. Without insulin, a diabetic person's blood sugar levels can become dangerously high or low. To keep their blood sugar steady, they need to take insulin as a medication. The first insulin medication was made from insulin that was isolated from the pancreas glands of pigs or cattle that had been butchered for their meat. Newer insulin medication is made by putting the human insulin gene into bacteria or yeast cells. The cells make insulin protein, which is then purified and given to diabetic people. So here are the observations that the scientists made. 1. In humans, insulin is produced only by specialized cells in the pancreas glands. 2. The only organisms that have pancreas glands that naturally make insulin are vertebrates. 3. Though pork chops and steak are much more popular foods, some people enjoy eating the pancreas glands from animals, a delicacy that some cultures call sweetbreads. 4. Some diabetic people had allergic reactions to insulin medication that had been isolated from pigs or cows. Their immune systems recognized the insulin as foreign and attacked it. 5. The amino acid sequence of insulin varies among species. The human insulin protein is made up of 51 amino acids. Insulin from pigs is 98% identical to human, and insulin from cows is 94% identical. 6. All living things read information in genes the same way. So here is the question that the teacher posed to the students. Which is a better medication for diabetic people? Insulin isolated from pigs or cows, or insulin made by inserting a human insulin gene into bacteria or yeast cells? Now, what you're going to be doing today is you're going to get the driving question for this unit, and your job is going to be to create a claim, use evidence to support that claim, and then tie it in with reasoning. So that's what you want to do. So on your paper, we can look at argument A. So to save time, just like they do in the cooking shows, bing, I already have it done for you so we can kind of go through and talk about it. So when evaluating arguments here, you typically want to start it off. Your first sentence is usually going to be your claim. Here, it follows that pattern. Insulin that is made by inserting a human insulin gene into bacteria or yeast cells is a better medication for diabetic people than insulin isolated from pigs or cows. Again, this student is answering the question. That's your claim. Now, here comes that supporting evidence. The insulin from both pigs and cows has a different amino acid sequence from human insulin and is triggered an allergic reaction in some patients. Now, when you go to start writing your claim evidence reasoning, you would want to have more evidence, but again, this is just for illustration purposes. Now, notice what we're squiggling. This is the reasoning. Most times, reasoning can start with since or therefore, but it doesn't have to. So since all living things read information in genes the same way, the bacterial yeast should make insulin from the human gene the same way cells in a pancreas do. Because this insulin will have the same amino acid sequence as natural human insulin, the diabetic's person's immune system will be less likely to recognize it as foreign. Insulin that is less likely to trigger an allergic reaction is a better medication. Again, this one is based on facts and not feelings. They were using their system to thinking. This student was able to produce a well-written claim. So every box checks off yes. Now, let's look at student B's argument. Again, started off with a claim. Insulin isolated from pigs or cows is a better medication for diabetic people than insulin made in bacteria or yeast cells. So if we go to the checklist, is the claim clearly stated? Yes, it is. But this one is not consistent with all the available evidence. We had 6 pieces of evidence, and this one is not. And it's not the simplest conclusion based on all of the available evidence. Now let's look at their evidence. Single cell bacteria and yeast do not have pancreas glands, and they do not normally make insulin. Pigs and cows are vertebrates, and their pancreas glands naturally make insulin. Insulin from pigs or cows is more natural than insulin made from yeast or bacteria. Again, this student is beginning to insert their own opinions. You want to stay away from that when you are writing your claim and your evidence. You want to base it solely on facts. So if we look at the argument checklist, here, the evidence, there is enough to support the claim. All of the evidence is not relevant. Okay, so there isn't enough evidence to support the claim, and all of it is not relevant to the claim. Now, do the data collection, analysis, and interpretation seem reasonable? Yeah, it does. But again, they inserted their feelings. Now, the last part, since natural products are better than synthetic ones, insulin from pigs or cows would be a better medication for diabetic people. We also already eat cows and pigs, and it would be better to not waste the natural products that could be made from the parts people don't usually eat and would otherwise throw away. Again, inserting their opinions, their feelings. So here you see the checklist for the reasoning. So when you start to write your claim evidence reasoning, you want to look at this checklist and you want to ask yourself, can I say yes to all of these things? If you cannot, then you need to go back and rewrite it. All right, so that was your crash course in evaluating arguments. So now you will do the luciferase argument on your own. You will do the same thing that we just did. You would read all of the available information, and then from there you will look at student A and student B's argument to see if they have written a valid claim. All right, so very good. Next thing I want to explain before it is time for us to say goodbye is today you will be handed out your closed ecosystem project. You are going to be going on a journey here. And so the driving question that we're trying to figure out is, if the human population were to leave Earth, how will we sustain life on another planet? If you remember at the beginning of this unit, Miss Thibodeau introduced you to our anchor phenomenon. You watched a video where you saw ice calving. And what we're trying to figure out is what factors are contributing to sea levels rising. We know that the ice is Kelvin. We know that the sea levels are rising. So now we're doing these miniature investigations to try to go back and answer that overall anchor. So our first investigation, where we're going to be looking for some evidence, is, so if sea levels kept rising and we run out of land and we need to vacate planet Earth and go to Mars, how will we sustain life on another planet? So your job is to try to recreate this planet in a jar. So that's the closed ecosystem. Okay. So what you're going to be doing today in class is your background research, looking at your articles that you have been given. Your substitute teacher should have handed you out the 2 articles. Your job is to read those 2 articles so you can come back and answer this question here. What were the mistakes made in Biosphere 2? How do you know those mistakes? It's because you are going to read those articles and extract that information from there. After you read the articles and you get that information to answer that question, you will begin the process of doing your research. On the lab report, it gives you an example of a sample research question, because you're going to be researching things about your ecosystem. Like, for example, you have to decide if you're going to do terrestrial or aquatic. Terrestrial means land dwelling, aquatic means water. So if you're doing a terrestrial ecosystem, your research might center around, let's say you're putting lizards in your container, it may center around what would be the best, how to recreate an ecosystem for lizards. Or you might want to research, what is a lizard's diet? Those types of things. What is the best plant to produce enough oxygen for my system? So those are the things that you want to research. And then possibly you want to start constructing your hypothesis. But this is all that we want you to do for right now. So if you can make it maybe all the way to here, but if not, that's okay. We'll come back and revisit it. But again, you definitely want to start doing your background research. What is your question? And then what source did you use to answer that question? Again, here's a sample question from a student. What does a closed ecosystem need to survive? That is a very good question to do research, because you need to know that so that you can ensure that your ecosystem survives. So that's the main thing that you'll be doing there. So again, you'll have those 2 articles to read. You'll use that to answer that first question, and then you'll come here. And then the last thing that you all will have is a Nearpod to do. So this is the code. If you have logged into Clever, you can easily just click onto Nearpod and you can enter in this code, which is P5EAR. P5EAR is the code that you need to enter in order to see this Nearpod and watch a video about one of the scientists who was in the Biosphere 2. So that, again, can give you some more background information so you can understand why we're doing what we're doing. So this is primarily what you're going to be doing in your class today. If you have any questions, feel free to message Ms. Thibodeau. I am Ms. Gillam. You can always email me at cgillam@stcharles.k12.la.us. Just a message away, and we are here to help you. All right. So I hope that this explains everything that you need. And if, like I said, you have any questions, please feel free to ask. All right. Happy learning, guys. Bye-bye.